Hey everyone, Coach Patrick here from Endurance Nation, back with another special interview podcast. Every once in a while, we get the chance to sit down with a brand inside the triathlon cycling space, have an opportunity to talk about what it means to run a business supporting crazy people like you and me out there. We're very pleased today to have Jon Thornham here from FloCycles. Jon, how you doing?
Hey man, good. How are you?
Very well, thank you. I was just talking with you before the podcast about clearly with you doing the faster podcast, you've upped your game in terms of the audio and the visual. So much appreciated here.
No worries. Totally. I got a good mic, good audio setup, so I know what it's like. So happy to help.
You gotta have that quiet space away from all the hustle and bustle for sure. I bet some of those early podcasts were maybe not so good.
You know what, man? Actually, my brother was the guy who, when he was still here, he set up the original podcast stuff, and I gotta say, man, he did it right from the beginning. He got the mics, he got the setup. Yeah, we did a lot of testing. So we had heard some other podcasts. We're like, man, we don't want to do that. No offense to anybody's podcast, but we just audio is kind of a thing we got right into. So yeah, no, it's been good.
No, sweet. Yep. Okay, awesome. Well, you guys, it kind of dovetails with your brand there at FloCycles, right? You're not going to mess around. You're going to do it right. You're going to do it well. So I appreciate that attention to detail. I think when you find someone who's kind of hit their sweet spot, that level of skill sort of permeates everything that they do, right?
Yep,
you're not the kind of guy who's going to go mow his lawn and be like all over the place. You're like, these lines are good. They're straight. They look good, right? You're pulling it all together. Awesome.
Sure.
Well, so I want to talk, I'm super excited to have you here. And I do want to talk big picture, like industry. I want to talk about the podcast and kind of your evolution as a brand. But I want to go back just so our listeners have some context for sure, so they learn a little bit about the history of FloCycles and where you came from. So can you talk a little bit about how your origin story for folks here on the pod?
Yeah. So it was, it would have been 2009. My brother and I had recently graduated from university, and we were both mechanical engineers. Both very athletic growing up. We were ski racers. We were baseball players, martial artists. I mean, we did a whole bunch of different things. And university days, we were both gym rats. Spent a lot of time in the gym. And my brother kind of was getting bored of the gym, and so we were working these day jobs as engineers. And he said, "Man, what am I gonna do athletically?" And he was reading a Men's Health magazine, and he saw something about triathlon and triathletes. He said, "What's this?" And so he read it. He said, "I think I could do that." So he just kind of jumped in, feet first. It wasn't something that I had done or was going to do. And he started buying all the gear, and he bought this bike. He bought this old Cervelo. I think it was an R3 or something like that. I forget what it was. It was an old bike. And obviously it came with like some really cheap wheels. And so he's like, "I'm going to go buy wheels." And he shopped around, bought them, brought them home. And he said, "What do you think these cost?" And I was like, "I don't know, $500. He's like, "No." And he said, "Keep going." I said, "What, down?" And he said, "No, up." So I kept going up. And by the time he told me he paid like $2,200 or something for them, I thought he was nuts. And he said, "Do you think we could, design something or do this and make it more affordable?" And I said, "Yeah, I think we could." And he said, "Do you want to start a business?" And I said, "Yeah, let's do it." And so my next question was like, "Okay, so what are all the parts of the wheel? Like, I know it's a wheel, but like, this is the hub. What are these?" And so that was it. And then from there, we spent a lot of time thinking about how would we start a company to make something more affordable. How would we make sure that it was designed really, really well from an engineering perspective? And that really led into Flo. It was kind of the story that it kind of merged two worlds. At the time, there were companies that were doing a lot of R&D, a lot of wind tunnel stuff, which was very expensive, but they were selling through retail. And then there were companies that were selling consumer direct. So, they were cutting out all the retail distribution model, but they were buying, off the shelf products that weren't really designed. And so we said, well, we're going to mix the two. We're going to sell consumer direct, but we're going to do all our own engineering in-house, design something really fast. And we used computational fluid dynamics software, which not that others weren't using it, but it was like our main design piece. Like that's what we went with. And other companies were using a sort of in combination with wind tunnel time. But everything we did was with CFD, and we've kind of sort of advanced the CFD space from a cycling wheel perspective as we've grown. So no, it's pretty awesome. But that's kind of the quick, dirty version of our origin story.
I love it. Okay, so you guys are clearly like human Swiss Army knives, can do anything, and you're like, hey, there's a problem, we're going to solve it. I have to say, having been to Interbike, I think that's a great encapsulation, or when it was around, of those two elements, right? You've got on one side of the show floor, you've got folks who are like, literally have like human beings, like with, electrodes attached to them, doing all this crazy stuff, and scientists flown in from all over the world who are monitoring them, like elaborate, over the top, so expensive. And on the other side of the floor, you can walk into a room and there's some guy from China in a suit, totally smoking where he's not supposed to be smoking, and he will sell you all of these things that look like carbon wheels.
And you put your sticker on it.
Yeah, totally, exactly. He'll print out right now. Ready? What do you want? Good, it's yours.
Yep.
And I don't think the consumer appreciates the gap between those two worlds. And so one of my favorite parts about Flo is that you've sort of found that home in between the two, where you've gotten, really competent at the numbers that matter to cyclists, but you've done it in a way that allows people to still afford your wheels as a cyclist, and I think that's a huge piece of the puzzle that people just don't appreciate until they buy a bike. Or let's put it this way: when they buy a bike, I don't think they appreciate the cost of the wheel because it seems all wrapped in. And they go back and they say, now I need race wheels. I want to up my game. I'm going to pull out these wheels. And they say, like you said, you've got to be kidding me. There's no way these things can possibly cost that much.
Exactly.
I'd be curious, just off the top of your head, like are your customers the ones, like, do they come to you? Would you say, and be like, hey, I want to throw these wheels on my new bike? Or are they saying it's time for me to sort of up my racing game and I'm looking for some new wheels? What does your typical customer look like?
So it's a combination, really. I mean, so I think what you got to understand is there's been changes in the industry over the last, 5 years. When we started back in probably, our first sale date was in 2012. I would say high 90% of bicycles that showed up did not show up with any type of carbon wheel. So it was different. Today, you still get some bikes that don't show up with carbon wheels, but at times it's becoming that 90% is definitely getting less. You do get bikes with carbon wheels. What I've always said, though, is that if you look at a lot of them that show up, they're those OE wheels that just have another sticker on them. So we get a combination. A lot of times it's people who don't have a product, and sometimes it's people that have like a bike that has a carbon wheel, but it's just not really a good carbon wheel. Yeah. So we have a trade-in program for all that sort of stuff. So we have this hybrid, it's kind of a mixture of both.
Okay. That's awesome. Yep. And I see you've also got them over on FloCycling.com. I can see the wide variety for you guys. How has the industry shift, right? Where all of a sudden it was like, hey, we're going to disc, from the rim brakes. How did you that space? Because that was a big change.
Man, there's these two major thing. Well, there's like multiple, but I'll just give a quick version. But like, there's these metamorphoses that have happened. When we first started, everything was like 10 speed, right? It was all 10 speed. And there was like a couple people that had like 11 speed. So we're like, okay, what we'll do is we'll ship everything standard with a 10 speed free hub on the wheel. And if we ever get somebody that orders one, we'll just swap the free hub. It'll be an upgrade. Okay. Well, like the first several orders we had, my brother and I at the time, we were processing all of the orders by ourselves. Okay. And so we would do like 2 or 3 swaps for like, 200 orders. And then like the third order or fourth order, it was like 60 people ordered 11 speed. So it was like just taking so much time. So there was a big shift there. Right now, we're kind of seeing somewhat of a shift with XDR. XDR is becoming a lot more popular. So that's something. And then, the disc brake thing is like this. It's like this new thing. So we saw like, maybe 5% orders were disc brake. And now this year it's just starting to explode. I mean, we're moving much more to like a 50-50 on disc brakes. And I think the thing is that when you have an aftermarket product, you have a lot of customers that have an older bike, right? So now we're sort of getting into that 3-4-ish year window where disc brakes have sort of been a standard. And so now that older bike has disc brakes. So we're starting to see a lot of upgrades on the disc brake side. But I think if I'm being completely honest, by 2025, I think rim brake stuff is going to be very, very small on our percentage of sales.
Sure. All right. Note to self: must buy my carbon wheels soon for my rim road bike.
I know, right?
For sure.
They are faster, man. They are definitely faster. It's like 2 watts. All the testing we've done, you're saving 2 watts with rim brakes, and it's I don't know. I guess it is what it is.
Sure. I guess I just, for me, from a triathlete perspective, I'm like, I don't touch my brakes in a triathlon unless pretty much until I'm coming back to transition, if the course is designed properly. So the idea that I'm constantly, it's just not my world. A road bike for sure. Give me all the brakes. Like I could use all that stuff, but
I 100% agree.
Yeah. So that's a hard place to be. But I do know that you've got to be super attentive to those trends for sure. Like you mentioned, the time consuming element of it, the going back to customers, et cetera. And then I also imagine that form now has to have like 10 more checkboxes than it used to just sort of have 3, and now you've got to kind of know everything about everybody.
Definitely.
Yeah. So it's speaking of that direct to consumer model. So you started first sale in 2012. So the internet was a different place in 2012. I think MySpace was still around, and who knows what people were doing, right? I know back in the day, my joke used to be, if somebody signed up with an AOL address, I was like, they're not our customer because they do not know how to use the internet. I'm sure you probably have a similar experience where you're like, oh, this order from Oklahoma, I think it needs to be lost immediately.
Yeah, exactly.
Refunded before we go down that road. But I'd be curious, how have you evolved that sales experience for your customers over time as you've been able to take advantage more of the web and all of that stuff?
Really good question. To be honest with you, when we first started, I've only been working as an engineer for a short time. I paid for my own education. I saved pretty much every dollar I could. And so we had kind of built the structure of the company. We had purchased molds. We had all these things going that allowed us to run the company. But what we didn't have is we didn't have any money to buy inventory. Yeah. So, I can tell you, we worked our way into a factory and we convinced, and it's still our factory today. Arguably they're the best wheel factory in all of Asia. Okay. And they said, we'll let you be a customer, but you have to guarantee that you will buy a full container, which was like 450 cycling wheels. And so we didn't have we knew we didn't have the money. Right. So, we're like, okay, so we'll figure this out. And so what we did was, this was before like Kickstarter or Indiegogo or anything like that. So we kind of came up with this idea of our own pre-order, which is what we did. So we just set this thing up where it was like a year. We started signing people up. We had this whole launch program that we did. And we set this launch date, and within a minute we crashed the server, which was super problematic. We got it back up within about 5 minutes. And then in the hour, we sold I think it was 750 cycling wheels we sold in an hour. But in the beginning, we were doing 60 transactions a minute. So every second we were firing off an order. Right. And we were using PayPal as a processor back in the day. And we had 6 meetings with them, explain the process, everything. And like I say, back then, this whole pre-order thing didn't really exist. So it was a super successful day. And then what we found out was right after that, it was like a day after, we got a call, and it was from the fraud department from PayPal. And they said, you know what, this looks like fraud and we're holding your money for 6 months. Yeah. So we had the money to buy the wheels, but then we didn't have the money to buy the wheels. So long story short, we ended up figuring it out in some way. They eventually released the money 6 months later. And for a long time, we did this pre-order thing. We were selling them faster than we could make them. Right. And then eventually we got to the point where we were able to hold inventory, hold stock. Okay. And so really then it just became this, we've seen so many changes in the industry over the years. Originally we never offered a sale, right? Because we just didn't. By 2016, 17, every e-com site in the world was offering a sale. So we would have 50% of our contact emails were like, will you offer me a sale? Will you offer me a sale? And so we you have to make these changes and shifts. We've been very focused on trying to find different ways to market. So originally we wrote a ton of content. We've always had a very open book approach. We still do that. We still have a lot of content that we write. We have a podcast that we started 4 years ago. We work with some really great marketing guys that help us with some unique ways to page rank us. So it's always a change, Right. What we find is if larger brands are doing it, I'm not saying we don't do it, but we try and do something that's a little bit ahead and a little bit different to always sort of put us in front of people in a different way. Because what you can't do is I remember when you would go to Interbike back in the day, you just talking about Interbike, and you'd see like the Specialized booth. And I mean, they were spending several $100,000 just to be there.
Yeah.
Right. And we're like, well, we can't do that. So if you're trying to compete in that same space, you have to think differently. And that's something that we've always tried to do.
Oh, so smart too. I hear you, and it's, I think as a small, medium-sized business, it's always hard when, someone says, I was just over here and this happens. Like, thank God for Amazon and Prime shipping, right? Like I ordered this thing from Amazon. It came yesterday. Yesterday I ordered your shirt. It's not here today. Why is your shirt not here today? And I'm like, I'm not Amazon. Like, did you find me at Amazon?
It's so funny, man. I always said every time I see Amazon do something, I'm like, oh, you're hurting the little guys. Because what happens is like, I mean, you ship a cycling wheel, it's really expensive. It's like dimensional weight is really high. And somebody, we have a fulfillment center that really processes pretty quickly, but if it's like not overnight now, Amazon's also started this new return thing where you basically can like take it out of the box, take it out of the packaging. You just print a piece of paper, you take it back to your like UPS. You don't need to rebox it or anything. They do all that boxing for you. We're like, we don't have that set up. Like we can't do that, No. So it's kind of funny. I always laugh about that. Like I think we're pretty good for like a fulfillment perspective, but at the same time, no one's ever going to match Amazon, and we just kind of have to accept that. Yeah,
totally. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's so crazy. No, I hear you. I think, and people get it. So I think what's really smart about your approach in terms of the differentiation side is if you're meeting the customer halfway and you're giving them kind of what they want, but you do it in a different way, then they sort of understand that conceptually about your brand. Like, Flo's got me. That's good. They just don't do the same thing as these other folks do, which kind of, sits with how you build the wheels, what your strategy is. So all of that I think is really strategic in a way and help. You mentioned the PayPal thing. That still is a thing to this day, which just blows my mind. We were on PayPal for a long time, not the PayPal bash, but we started in 2007, and I remember that to this day, I think those larger financial institutions are not prepared for how people move on the internet with their money. And we had the same thing where people are like, I thought you refunded my money. I'm like, I did. And they're like, but I don't have it yet. It's been 3 weeks. And I'm like, I don't have it either. I gave it to PayPal. Like PayPal has to get it to you, to the thing. And so I'm calling PayPal. It was awful. What a nightmare. Thank goodness that has also evolved over time for sure. But that's, I appreciate the growth that you've gone through as a business. It's no small feat that you're still successful here today.
Yeah, for sure.
So I did, speaking of the brand decision, so the DTC, direct to consumer model, I was mentioning this before we talked, turn on the recording button. Right. So back in the day, it was sort of seen like, oh, okay, you're not going to be in a store. You're going to do something a little different. Maybe seems like a little fringe, like a little on the outside.
Yep.
But after the pandemic and how online life has changed now, I think it's such a smart play. I mean, we'll soon be in a place where people can just, I don't know if you've done that yet. Here we go. I'm going to Amazon you. Don't get mad at me. When I can like buy like a stapler and I can hold up my phone and be like, there's the stapler on my desk. Yes, I see the stapler on my desk. Right. So I could be like, my Flo wheels. There's my bike. There's my Flo wheels on my bike. Like, look at my bike with Flo. It looks awesome. We're evolving and I can click that thing right there and I can buy it, and never take out a card or anything. I think that there's going to be sort of an acceleration point where, you're going to see less foot traffic to stores, more customized user experiences on the net for purchases. Have you sort of felt that same momentum shift on your side, or is there still part of you that's like, it would be nice if, 45% of bikes shipped with Flo wheels or something?
So that's, really, really good questions. I think what was kind of unique for us back in the day was that we were direct to consumer. And I remember we went to Interbike, I think it was 2011. And there was like a pretty big name in the space that I knew. And I got talking to them and they had heard sort of about our startup story. And they came to me and said, they were like kind of angry with us and saying like, this is disrespectful what you're doing with this direct to consumer model. And I'm like, I hear you and I respect your, like, I'm willing to hear what you have to say, but I don't know. And what's funny is like 2 years later, I saw the same individual and they came up and they're like, you know what, I was wrong. They admitted it. They're like, look, I really see what you guys are doing. And you're not trying to, originally it was seen as like, you're really trying to just undercut the bike shops, and that's never been our thing. Like we we love bike shops. We talk to them, like we have great relationships with our local bike shops here in town. And so it's never been about that. It's really been more about giving the consumer a better experience. And one of the things that we like is that, like, my cell phone number to this day is still on the website. You can call me, I'll pick up. I'll talk to you about the product. I'll talk to you about why I designed it, how I designed it. It's a very, the messaging that you deliver as a brand is right there. You don't have all these layers and channels to go through. There's other components of it that you see that I think that, yeah, you're right. You know, the speed at which we can do things, we can sell things globally. We have done that. I mean, we've shipped to, I think it's like over 75 countries at this point that we've shipped Flo wheels to. Awesome. And so, you know, there's a lot of benefits to that. I think that, you know, would we put bikes on, or wheels on bikes? We would, but what kind of happens is that when you have a direct to consumer model, your pricing is lower. You're cutting out all that meat in the middle. Yeah. So, you know, it does change that. And it makes that a little bit more difficult to do, but no, like I say, I think that for the most part, I'm really happy we went with the decision to go direct to consumer. We run really, really lean. I work out of my house. We have employees that work out of their houses all over the country. I can travel. I can go anywhere. And the idea of a brick and mortar business to me from day one was just, it's so difficult to wrap my head around. Right. Like, I have to rent this space that I have to pay for. Not that we couldn't pay for the space, but it's just the flexibility of direct to consumer for not only for us as a brand, but for the consumer seemed to make the most sense. Yeah, there's a real, I think it's interesting you say that, right? It's a customer first decision, but it's beneficial for the business as well, right? Because the alternative is, well, we've got to rent this or buy this space so people can come to see us. But then if we do that, then how do all the people in the world come to see us? Like, this person from the Philippines isn't going to come here, right? That doesn't, we've automatically excluded so many people. Exactly. And I remember I was young. I think I was 16. I was watching the Winter Olympics and I saw this guy, and this was like, I mean, Winter Olympics, I think was, for me at 16 I was 15. It was 96. Was it 90? No, 98. Yeah, it was 98. So I was 16. And so, you know, this is really pre-internet. I mean, internet's there, but it's pretty early internet. I think Amazon had just started, and I remember watching this mogul skier, because I was a big skier at the time, and he was from Australia, and he's like, oh, he's been living in the United States because he runs an online business. And I'm like, what is that? That sounds really cool. Right. And at that age, I was still in high school. I'm like, I'm going to run an online business. That's what I'm going to do. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I just knew I wanted that flexibility. Well, I think you're also super uniquely positioned too. I think moving forward, I know that a lot of the DTC folks are on the bike side, on the frame side, are trying to bundle and put stuff together. But I think just the way the internet works, consumers are going to start saying, I do want that, but I don't want that part. You know, I'm going to go over here and get that part, and over here and get that part, and you know, have someone put it together here, or I'm handy enough to put it together myself, or what have you, and get all the things that they want, and not be limited by the choice that's there, for sure. You know, which is awesome. And then all they got to do is synchronize those packages to show up at the same time to get there, which is awesome. I love it. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about sort of the podcast side of things, because I think it's really consistent with your brand. And not only that, but you guys have just done a great job of, I think, staying focused and delivering probably like the wheels, right? Like, very focused, very deliberate, lots of value, you know, lots of meat in that podcast, and not a lot of fluff. Obviously it's a passion because you're still doing it, right? How does that fit into your overall strategy for the company? You know, is it just something you guys love to do for fun? Or are you like, oh yeah, no, we definitely see corollaries between people who are like, I've heard your voice in the podcast before. You do answer your phone, and who becomes a customer? Good question. I think that the thing is that it's kind of that thing that goes back, like it's like 7 touch points before somebody clicks buy, or like somebody wants to engage with you, right? So when we were really sitting down to think about, okay, so if we're going to do a podcast, what are we going to do? And podcasting back then was, I mean, it was kind of a thing, but not like it is today. Like, podcasts now are like, if you don't have a podcast, it's like, what are you doing? And I find like a lot of the podcasts that pop up today are just because people want a podcast. So we were very adamant about, we're not just going to have a random podcast. We're going to look at this in a way and say, what is the purpose? What is the goal? And if you think about the brand in general, like, why do we do what we do? Right. I mean, we do a lot of the things that we do are based around looking at problems, solving things in unique ways, right? And the reason we do that is we're trying to make the people that are involved with the products and the world that we live in sort of a better place, right? So, and with Flo, what that is that really becomes, we're doing everything we can as to make you a better, faster athlete. We're trying to give you information. We're trying to educate you. Like I say, from day one, we're the people that are in the wind tunnel. Like, this is before like stories or Instagram. This is back in like 2012. And we're trying to figure out, how do we live feed people to show them what a wind tunnel looks like, right?
Right.
It's that education piece. We're trying to show people what this process is like. And the same thing with Faster. Faster was born on the idea that there are a number of different ways to put together a mindset that makes you faster, right? We talk about wheels, right? We talk about wheels all day. And yes, wheels make you a lot faster if you optimize them. But there are so many other things out there. There's so many other things that people don't think about. You know, it's not just training. It's not just wheels. What you and I do is very, very important, but there's so many other things to consider. My brother came up with a really good idea at the time, like this watt point question, which kind of discusses, like, you know, it's kind of a thing that we do in each one. And it's been really cool. It's been really fun, because when you sit down to think about a show, like, you could get a bunch of people on the show, but we're trying to find really specific experts in fields and certain things like that. You know, one of the ones I just recently did that had a lot of feedback was, I worked with a Gottman specialist on like relationships and how important your relationship is to you as an athlete. And I just got so many comments and reviews on it, because people are like, you know, I recognize that this does have a huge impact, you know? So it's just kind of pushing the envelope and thinking about different ways to make people faster. But it's been hugely successful for us. Like the engagement that we get, the sales that we get from it, you know, I had a just thing like, well, how do we monetize the podcast? And we've kind of figured out a way to do that. So it's all part of a marketing strategy. It's all part of a bigger play. But at the same time, it really goes back to that core purpose of like, if we're going to do something, we're going to do it because we want to educate people and help make them better. Awesome.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, I think this is another example of like, when you are wrestling something, you and the team, it is about making that other person better. And I think that's a huge part of the experience. So what's neat about the podcast is you get an opportunity to step outside of the wheels and the sort of like that, you know, unilateral focus. This is what we do and we do it really, really well, but a chance to explore your passion, but look at it through the eyes of experts in other fields and say, so what are you optimizing? How do you optimize relationships, or how do you optimize testing, or how do you optimize cleat position, stuff that everyone, you know, your core market is absolutely into that optimization space and wants to learn. So you're giving them something much more, you know. I think what's great about that is you're adding, you're not just a story, because brands have stories now. Everyone's pretty good at that, but like there's character to your wheels. Like people look at those wheels, like they're going to look at a pair of those wheels and be like, they're going to think of your podcast. Right. They're going to think like, it's going to trigger them to be like, that's right. Like, I remember that one time I did this, and that's a powerful place to be as a brand, right? To be able to do something like that. That's fantastic. I love it. You know, but I mean, I think it's consistent with what all you do. I mean, you've got the program for the trees, right? You got the kids bike program. How do you find time to run your business on top of all these other things?
You know, it's funny. Yes, it's my wife always says to me, she's like, you know, I don't know anybody who, like, if they sit down in a 4-hour chunk to do something, you get like 8 hours done. I don't know how you do it. I think it's just over the years, you just have to learn as an entrepreneur to be really, really efficient, you know? I mean, and that, you know, but I think all the different things that you work on, like the podcast, right? Like, so every time I do a podcast, I come away thinking about something in a different way. We're educating people, but I'm also educating myself. I think about, like, you know, our Bike for a Kid program, like you just mentioned. You know, every time, like when we started the brand, I was adamant about, like, I wanted to do something that gave back, and it was to give back. But I find every time I go to one of these events and we build bikes for kids and we give them away, it, like, everything that you think about from a business stress, it just kind of goes away. You know, it's like this reset, and you come back, and it's not for everybody. Like, everybody doesn't have this desire to give back. I've always sort of had that in me, like this give back component. And so I find that, you know, you go and you see these kids, or you work with a kid that has literally never been on a bike before, and you're teaching them how to ride a bike. You know, all the other things kind of like, they just kind of melt away into the background. And then you're saying, well, you know, this is kind of the bigger purpose of why we're here, what we're doing. And you go back with a whole new mindset. And then, like, you know, the tree thing that you mentioned, I've always been a huge believer in running a business in a way that we're not really taking. We're kind of giving more back to the earth in some ways. Unfortunately, carbon fiber is a product that isn't the most environmentally friendly. And it is. It's getting a lot better, and we're doing everything that we can to make that better. But the things that we can control, like we remove all plastic from all of our boxes. We don't ship with plastics anymore. This would have been back in 2016, 17. This is kind of before a lot of this plastics push, but I was huge on this. I went over to Asia and where we manufacture, and I went through every factory that makes a box for us. I read all of the MSDS sheets on their glues. I was adamant. I don't want this glue used. I want this. I want to know what the dyes are that we're printing with. All of our boxes are made 100% recycled cardboard. And then what we do is to offset that carbon footprint is we work with a group called American Forest, where every wheel that we ship, we plant a tree. And so the amount of CO2 that tree takes over its lifetime is actually more than what it cost to manufacture and produce a wheel. But it's just something that, like I say, those things, again, they kind of, I think as business owners, you have a responsibility. Me personally, that's what I believe. And again, it just kind of tells the story of the brand and again, why we do what we do, why we show up each day, right? Making people or the world a better place.
Oh, it's awesome. It's fantastic. And I think to your point, like having that, we see a lot of that for us when we do events, and we get to, for our community, for people to come together. People kind of get it, they're like, oh yeah, this is great. And this is what we do. And we help one another. But then when you have that event and you can see like real tangible effects or the add-on effects, right? So I introduced you to you, and that doesn't really mean so much. It's nice to meet you, but then we find out that like, your wife needs a knee replacement, but that person happens to be a surgeon, and they like all of a sudden, like all this stuff is happening. And you're like, wow, that doesn't happen unless somebody builds that bridge, unless someone stood out and said, we're going to make this program, we're going to do this thing, right? So, changing that kid's life with a bike, or the carbon offset thing, just whether it's being a role model in the industry and raising the bar for everyone else, putting the pressure on other folks to be like, hey guys, look at what these guys are doing. Are we going to do something like this? Like, are we not? Like, what's the, they can't go the other way. They can't be like, no, we will take a tree. That's like they got a chainsaw. It's not going to work out so well. So I think that's kind of fantastic. And I just love the alignment. That's not a small feat for folks who are watching at home. Well, I do want to give people, before we wrap, I do want to give people some sense. I know when we talked initially, you talked a little bit, you got the CFD modeling for the wheels, but I know you were doing some neat stuff as you're looking to sort of advance the technology of the components and so on. Can you give us like a little hint or anything you can drop on us?
Yeah, man. So we're working on a product right now. So it was early 2020. My brother, he wanted to move on to other things, which I completely get. He did this for a decade. He did a great job. And so I ended up buying the company from him. And I was trying to figure out, like, what's my next thing going to be? What am I going to do? He and I had been working on some products together. The whole industry changed overnight when COVID hit. Like everything changed. We had this one product that was in the pipeline that was really cool, but a lot of it was based on travel. And I'm like, well, that makes no sense. So I just kind of let myself, I trusted myself. I said, I'll figure this out. And it was like September of last year. I just kind of shot up in the middle of the night with this idea in my head. We have full utility patents filed on it. There's hardware, there's firmware, there's software. And so we're probably, June? We're probably about 8 weeks away from like, we have a working prototype right now. We're riding around on it. It's doing really cool things. And, but a public like blog that I'll put out about it, I'm hoping will be maybe in like 8 to 12 weeks. I hope to write about it for the first time.
Set your calendars, folks. Set the reminder.
This is like, this will be like, I don't want to sound like Apple, but like every time Apple does something, like this is the biggest thing we've ever, this literally is like, it's monumental for what we will have done as a brand, as a company. From an engineering perspective, the engineering behind this, the team that I've worked with, that we have, and some of the other guys that we've worked with are some of the best in the world at what they do. And we're doing something that I think when people first think about it, it's one of those things, every time I think about how it works, it's like, does that really work that way? And it does. It takes a second to wrap your head around it, but once you get it, you're like, oh my gosh, this is the coolest thing. So we're really excited about it.
That's awesome. That takes me back to my high school physics class where you're like, there's lots of different ways to solve the same problem. And yeah, definitely a lot of it, at least for me as a young student, was not intuitive at all. I'm like, that really happens? Like, what are you talking about? That can't possibly work that way. But I've always been blown away by sort of elegant solutions. And I think people feel like on some level that we're sort of at the tail end, right, of like all this innovation and how much better and faster can things get. Like, look at the bike. It looks like a Formula One race car compared to what, these folks raced just 20 years ago. They look prehistoric. When you look at pictures, it's like, that's barely a bicycle. Like my grandmother rode something better than that. Yeah. And here we are. But it's amazing to me to see that right in that path. What people don't appreciate is that like decisions have been made and built upon. And so there's an opportunity to go back and find a new thread, a new place to innovate, kind of turn a ship away and make something super cool in an additive way, not a change way. But I'm super excited.
Yep. It was almost 2 years ago now. It was crazy. Time for me with COVID has been so crazy. But I was in Washington, D.C. and I saw like, it was one of the first Wright brothers bicycles, and there's this, like, it was this museum and then there's like their aviation display. Right. But you look at that and you think about like what those guys did. Right. And I've always thought about this way from product development or design or anything like that. It's like one step. Like if we take one step, like what is our next little step that gets us just a little bit further. Right. And so what we're developing in-house right now, there's products out there that are very successful products that our product will also do. But we do something above that product that is just a slightly different way to think about something. And it just opens up so many doors. And I don't know, I'm just really excited about it. So
awesome. That's fantastic. Well, I think it's great. Like not only do you have this sort of core passionate audience of people who just love the innovation that you bring and the consistency of it. But they're also, as you know, always hungry for more. So it's always neat when you can see, sort of a brand of the people will be able to step up and be like, hey, we do super awesome, cool stuff as well. Not just all the day-to-day stuff that you love and take advantage of, but something also innovative. Yeah. So I know they'll be excited about it. And I will be too, for sure. Cool. Well, awesome. So people can find you at FloCycling, obviously online, FloCycling.com. The site's awesome. They can, put different stickers on their wheel and be super happy and fast, whether it's road or time trial or gravel or whatever they're coming up with next. They're setting their countdown clocks for 8 to 12 weeks. Hoping for 12 weeks, hopefully. Hoping for the A side. Totally. And they'll find you on the Faster podcast as well. I'll put all those in the show notes for sure. But it's been great to have you on the pod this time, Jon. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you very much for having us. And like I say, I'm excited to have you on ours. I think that would be cool to chat about some of the cool things you do. So it'll be great to talk to you again. Yeah.
I've been talking with the team a little bit too, to kind of get their feedback. So it's not just from my perspective. So, super excited. I look forward to it as well. Well, get back to whatever you're doing. You got to go back there and change the world, man. I don't want to take too much of your time. You're 4 hours. You know what I mean? So
that's right.
Awesome.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks so much. I'll be in touch.
See ya.